I did not understand the danger until my own son grabbed my arm, looked me straight in the eyes, and whispered, "Dad, do not go home." And in that moment, I realized the place I called safe had already turned against me. Welcome to Trust and Treason Files, where we expose the raw truth behind the masks people wear. My name is Andrew Miller. I'm 49 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that hard work and honesty would protect me. That if I showed up every day and did my best for my family, nothing truly bad could touch us. But that belief started to crack the night my son warned me like he was trying to save my life without knowing exactly how to explain what he had seen. I was not supposed to be home that evening. I had stayed late at work because a project ran long, and when I finally turned off my computer, I felt tired but calm, already thinking about dinner and the quiet of my living room, the kind of normal routine that makes you forget how fragile peace really is. My son called me as I walked to my car, and his voice sounded wrong, not loud, not crying, just tight, controlled, like he was trying very hard not to panic. And he asked me where I was, and when I told him I was heading home, he went silent for a few seconds before saying those words that still echo in my head. "Dad, do not go home." I laughed at first, not because I thought he was joking, but because my mind could not find a place to put fear yet, and I asked him what he meant, and he said he could not explain it over the phone, that I just needed to trust him and stay where I was for a while. My son is not dramatic. He does not invent stories, and he does not play games with fear. So, as I stood there in the parking lot, keys in my hand, I felt something heavy settle in my chest, because whatever he had seen or heard had shaken him enough to break his calm. I asked him if he was safe, and he said yes, but his voice told a different story, and I realized he was choosing his words carefully, like someone nearby might be listening. I drove to a gas station instead of home, parked under bright lights, and waited, telling myself this was probably a misunderstanding, maybe an argument, maybe tension that did not involve me. But deep down, I knew my life had not been as calm as I pretended it was. At home, things have been strange for months. Not loud fights, not obvious conflict, just small shifts in tone, sudden quiet when I entered a room, conversations that stopped when I asked what was being discussed, and questions about my work and finances that felt too detailed to be casual. I told myself it was stress. I told myself everyone has phases, and I told myself I was imagining things because it was easier than accepting that something was changing in a way I did not control. My son called again, and this time he told me that earlier that evening he had heard people talking about me. Not in anger, but in planning voices, the kind of voices people use when they think they are being careful. And he said my name came up more than once, connected to words that did not sound safe. He would not repeat everything. Not because he was hiding it, but because he was scared to say it out loud, and that scared me more than any clear threat ever could. I asked him who was there, and he hesitated before telling me. It involved people I trusted, people who smiled at me every day, people who said they cared about my future, and that was the moment I felt truly alone, because danger from strangers is easier to face than danger from those who know your life. I realized then that my son had made a choice, not an easy one, to warn me even if it meant standing against people who had power over him. And that told me this was not small, this was not nothing, this was something that had been building quietly while I kept living like everything was normal. As I sat there under the bright lights, watching cars come and go like the world had no idea what was happening to me, I thought about every sign I had ignored, every moment I chose comfort over clarity, and I understood that my son was now carrying a fear that should have been mine. He told me to wait, to stay where people could see me, and to not answer calls from certain numbers if they came in. And when I asked him how he knew which ones, he said, "Because I heard them talk about it." And his voice broke just a little at the end. I promised him I would not go home until he told me it was safe, but inside I already knew that safe might never mean the same thing again. Because when your own child warns you about the place you built your life around, you stop asking if something is wrong, and you start asking how deep it goes. I sat there in that gas station parking lot longer than I expected, watching the numbers on my phone clock change while my mind kept going back to the same question: what could make my own son sound that afraid? And the longer I waited, the more I realized that fear does not arrive suddenly. It grows quietly, fed by small things you ignore until they become too heavy to carry. My son stayed on the line with me at first, speaking in short, careful phrases, telling me when people moved around the house, when voices rose and fell, and when things went quiet again, and through every update, I could hear the strain in him, because he was trying to protect me while also pretending everything was normal around him. He told me that over the past few weeks, people at home had been asking about my routines, when I usually arrived, which days I worked late, and whether I carried cash or just cards, and at the time he thought they were just being curious. But that night, he realized the questions were not random. They were pieces of a plan. I remembered those questions, the way they had been asked casually, mixed into everyday talk, and I remembered brushing them off because I did not want to believe anyone close to me would need that kind of information for the wrong reasons. As the night went on, calls started coming in, numbers I recognized, people asking where I was, why I was late, whether everything was okay, and I answered with half-truths, saying work had kept me busy because even lying gently felt safer than telling the truth to people I no longer trusted. The pressure did not come in the form of threats. It came in the form of concern, worried messages, and voices that sounded caring. And that made it harder, because when manipulation wears the mask of love, you feel guilty for questioning it. My son later told me that after he warned me, the mood in the house shifted, not loud, not angry, just tense, like people were waiting for something to happen, and that scared him more than any argument could have. I spent that night moving between public places, coffee shops, a late-night diner, anywhere I could sit without being alone, because isolation makes fear louder, and being seen made me feel slightly safer, even if I did not know from what. Days passed like this, slow and heavy, filled with pretending everything was fine while inside I was slowly breaking apart, because living without trust is exhausting, and I was losing sleep, losing appetite, and losing the sense of stability I'd spent years building. My son and I developed small codes, simple phrases that told me if things felt normal or not, because speaking openly did not feel safe anymore, and I hated that he had to learn fear at such a young age just to protect his father. At work, I started noticing changes too. Meetings I was not invited to, decisions made without my input, and whispers that stopped when I entered the room, and I realized that whatever was happening at home might also be touching my life outside of it. I felt isolated in every place that once felt familiar, and the silent grind of that isolation wore me down more than any argument ever could, because you cannot fight what you cannot see clearly. Still, I did not confront anyone. Not yet, because part of me hoped I was wrong, and part of me was afraid of what would happen if I was right. So I stayed quiet, watched carefully, and waited, even though waiting was slowly draining everything I had. Every night, I thought about going home, about facing whatever was there, but then I would hear my son's voice again in my head, tight with fear, telling me not to, and I knew I could not risk proving him wrong. The grind was not loud. It was quiet, constant, and heavy, and it taught me that fear does not always scream. Sometimes it just sits beside you and slowly changes who you are. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, slow and heavy, like something buried too long finally deciding to surface. And the more I paid attention, the clearer it became that my son's warning was not about one moment. It was about a plan that had been forming quietly while I kept living like nothing was wrong. It started with my bank. I received a call one afternoon asking me to confirm changes to my account. Small changes at first, contact details, security questions, preferences that only I should have been able to change. And as I listened, my chest tightened because I had not touched any of those settings. I drove straight to the branch, sat across from a woman who spoke carefully, professionally, and she told me that someone had called him multiple times over the past weeks, answering my security questions correctly, slowly adjusting things so that access would become easier later, and the worst part was that the answers were things only people close to me would know. That was when I understood what kind of danger my son had sensed. This was not anger, not impulse. This was preparation. I asked for a record of the calls, not the voices, but the numbers used, and when I saw them, my hands went cold because they were numbers I recognized, numbers saved in my phone under names I trusted. I did not confront anyone yet because I needed to know how far it went, so I quietly changed everything, passwords, access, contacts, and asked the bank to flag any unusual activity, all while pretending nothing had changed at home or at work. A few days later, my son told me that people were upset, not loudly, but in frustrated whispers because something they expected to happen had not worked. And he said my name came up again, this time with irritation instead of planning. That was enough. I arranged to meet my wife somewhere neutral. Not home, not work, just a quiet place where we could talk without eyes or ears around us. And I told her everything, slowly, carefully, not accusing, just explaining what I had discovered. At first she looked confused, then uncomfortable, and then tired, the kind of tired that comes from holding a truth you do not want to admit. She told me that her brother had been in trouble for a long time, money trouble, serious enough that people were pressuring him, and that my mother-in-law believed the only way to protect him was to get access to my finances quietly, without asking, without waiting for permission. She said it started as just checking, just making sure there was a way to help if things went bad, but then it became planning, timing, and control. And when she realized how far it had gone, she froze because standing up to her family felt harder than letting me be used. Hearing that felt like something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet break because betrayal from strangers hurts, but betrayal from the people who share your life changes how you see everything. I asked her if she knew they were going to move forward that night, the night my son warned me, and she looked away before answering, and that was enough to tell me the truth even before she spoke. She said she did not know the exact plan, but she knew something was supposed to happen soon, something that would put control in their hands, and she hoped it would work without me noticing. That sentence stayed with me. Without me noticing. I realized then that my son had done what no adult in that house had been brave enough to do. He had chosen honesty over loyalty to power, and that made me proud of him in a way words cannot fully explain. I did not shout at my wife. I did not threaten. I did not collapse. I simply told her that what had been done could not be erased by apology, only by change, and that from that moment forward, my life, my money, and my choices would no longer be shared with people who saw me as a resource instead of a person. The confrontation with her family came later, calm, controlled, and clear. I told them I knew what they had tried to do. I told them it had failed, and I told them that access to me would now come with boundaries they had never respected before. They reacted the way people do when control is taken away, with denial, with guilt, with reminders of everything they had ever done for me. But none of that changed what they had planned, and none of it changed the fact that my own son had been afraid enough to try to save me. That was the psychological turning point for me. I stopped seeing myself as someone who had to keep everyone calm, and started seeing myself as someone who had to keep my child safe, even from the people who shared our name. And once that shift happened, there was no going back to the man I had been before. After everything came into the open, life did not suddenly become easy, but became honest, and honesty, even when painful, is lighter than living under a lie you cannot name. The first thing I did was protect what could still be protected, my finances, my routines, and most importantly, my son's sense of safety, because no child should feel like they're guarding their parent from danger created by adults. I moved out of the house quietly, not in anger, not with shouting or scenes, but with clear intention, because space was the only way I could think without pressure, and my son began spending more time with me. Not because I forced it, but because he needed to feel that his courage had not put him in danger. My wife and I spoke many times after that, not as enemies, but as two people facing the damage of choices made out of fear. And while she took responsibility, she also had to accept that some trust, once broken, does not return just because someone regrets breaking it. Her family was given clear boundaries, not as revenge, but as protection, limited contact, no access to my finances, and no involvement in decisions that were not theirs to make. And when those rules were challenged, consequences followed, calmly and consistently. The most important change happened inside me, because I stopped measuring my worth by how well I kept everyone calm and started measuring it by how well I protected what mattered most. And that shift changed every decision I made after. My son slowly returned to being a kid instead of a guard, laughing more, worrying less, and trusting again. And watching that happen told me I had made the right choice, even if it cost me the version of family I thought I had. Looking back, I know that night in the parking lot was not the beginning of the story. It was the moment I finally listened to the truth that had been trying to reach me for a long time, and it took my son's fear to wake me up. If there is one thing I learned, It is that loyalty without honesty is not love. It is control, and no child should ever have to risk themselves to save a parent from people who should have been protecting them. If you believe in justice, in courage, and in choosing what is right even when it costs you comfort, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. New files open daily.